What can happen if an identity is compromised? Explain really also the link to infrastructure.
First of all, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Identities are compromised all the time. In many cases, as we see, identities are extremely over provisioned, over privileged. They have way more permission than they actually require, which means many identities have privileged access. And when such an identity is compromised, the threat actor can do a ton of things, starting from actually accessing your sensitive information and exfiltrating it out within minutes, because it's all out there in the cloud. It's not in your data center. That's one. But in many cases, the threat actor can actually spin down your infrastructure or spin it up.
Data is the predominant concern. So this is what I'm trying to keep secure, but identity is the means to an end for an attacker. Once you have some application security vulnerability, now they have a cloud presence, and whether they're successful or not in doing the next step of the attack is entirely dependent on the identity, how it's managed, what permissions it has. And it's hard because, it's easy to just say, let's just keep all of the identity permissions stripped down, but applications need to do things, developers need to do things.
Craig Herter, I think, has the $64,000 question. What is the best way to curtail user permission creep to alert when the creep occurs?
You can try to set some policies right in place. You could say, hey, users of a specific type that belong to specific groups should have permissions up to a certain level and monitor for deviation from these policies. You should get an alert. Or in some cases, you can automatically remediate and remove those permissions. Another way to address the same problem is to grant everyone very low permissions to begin with, and then provide them permissions in a manner that is called just in time, right?
Let me go to a question that Ian Pointer has. I'm going to amend his question and ask, what are common mistakes they're making outside of granting far too many permissions?
It's also not really knowing what are the responsibilities of a specific person when it comes to infrastructure. You're onboarding a person, he might be a developer in one team. You don't really know what this person requires. And that's a very typical problem when you come to large dev houses that have a lot of developers, and they're moving between teams, and you can't really follow that in a very efficient way.
Offboarding is just one of those hard problems in security. It's you just say, yeah, just offboard all the people or like just patch all the things. But in practice, it's so operationally complex that most organizations fail to do that.
When you started looking down this road of dealing with permissions in general, what was your frustration that you were dealing with early on that you're feeling that we're tackling this at a better level today that we weren't, a few years ago?
So when we started on this, when I was working at Netflix, there was really no solutions in the marketplace for anything like this. Amazon provided Access Advisor data, which is the perfect data source to start doing this kind of work. Amazon's had CloudTrail before, so the primitives that you needed existed, and there was no solutions. This is something that's the same for everybody. I would prefer to buy this, and there just wasn't anything to buy. So we had to create this internally. And today what's changed is that one, there's a lot more visibility into the problems. And the other is that there's a lot of solutions available today that weren't before. So I think this has really come to the forefront, and there's a lot more options today, such as Ermetic, that didn't exist when I started down this path.
I'm going to ask your final advice on this topic of hacking cloud infrastructure for someone who is not started, halfway there, but struggling. What's your advice at all those stages?
I would recommend to learn a little bit before you go, especially on the differences between cloud infrastructure and on-prem infrastructure. Again, on-prem identity was important, but not as important it is in the cloud. Network was more important. So trying to really understand what are the key differences and how you should build your cloud security roadmap as opposed to your on-prem security roadmap. If you have started with your approach to the cloud, I would say get the controls over your identity and access management in the cloud as soon as possible, because this is exactly the one area that you cannot crawl before you run. And if you're already there, really getting visibility into your risks in IAM and prioritizing them, focusing on the most important ones and remediating them quickly. So to make sure you have a pretty clean environment, that's probably a good idea.
Definitely talk to people that have been down the path before. People have experienced this pain, and if they tell you about it, you can avoid those mistakes. So do that. And then if you're in, then cloud security is just kind of a rehash of the same old security problems that we've always had. How do we know what assets we have? How do we know when those assets change to a bad state? So come up with some kind of a baseline way of measuring that. And then, at the tail end, like this problem never ends. So once you solve the 5 or 10 biggest problems you have today, there'll be a new 5 or 10 biggest problems. So recognize that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Buckle in for the long haul and plan the most strategic work that you can.